The morning after my sister's wedding, I opened my banking app out of habit the way you check your phone before you're even fully awake, and I sat up so fast I knocked my water bottle off the nightstand. The number on the screen didn't make sense. My savings account, the one I had been quietly building for 3 years, the one that held $87,400, my down payment, my future, my entire plan showed a balance of $14. $14. I stared at it long enough that my phone screen dimmed and locked itself. I unlocked it again. Still $14. I pressed the little refresh arrow like that would fix something. It didn't. I called the bank's automated line because some part of my brain refused to believe what I was seeing until a recorded voice confirmed it. The voice told me there had been 2 wire transfers in the past 36 hours, one for $50,000, one for $37,386, both authorized, both gone. I set my phone face down on the hotel comforter and looked at the ceiling for a long time. The wedding had been beautiful. My younger sister Cassie had cried at the altar in that way, where she kept laughing at herself for crying, and her husband Marcus had wiped her cheeks with his thumb, and everyone in the church made that soft collective sound people make when something is genuinely sweet. My mother had worn blush pink and looked radiant. My stepfather had given a toast that made the whole reception laugh. My aunt had danced so hard she lost a heel. I had been there for all of it. I had been the maid of honor. I had given my own toast, and people had cried at the good parts. I had bustled Cassie's dress 3 times. I had danced. I had smiled until my face hurt. And the whole time, someone had been emptying my bank account. I got dressed slowly, thinking about who had access. That was the thing that kept circling back, who had access. I had set up a joint beneficiary designation for my savings account 2 years ago when I went through a minor health scare. Nothing serious, but the kind of thing that makes you think about contingencies. I had added my mother. It had seemed practical at the time. Responsible, even. She had never mentioned it since. Neither had I. I walked down to the hotel breakfast room. My mother was already there, sitting across from my stepfather Ray with a plate of fruit and a coffee, looking relaxed in a way that seemed now almost deliberate. I sat down. I said, "Mom, can I ask you something?" She looked up and smiled. "Good morning, honey. Did you sleep okay?" "I slept terribly. I think all the excitement." "Did you take money from my savings account?" The smile didn't vanish right away. It held for a second too long. Just a fraction, the way a sound lingers after the source has stopped. Then she set down her coffee cup. Ray looked at his plate. "Sweetheart," my mother started. "Just yes or no," I said. "Did you?" She exhaled through her nose. Not a sigh exactly, more like a release of something she'd been holding. "We needed it, Maya. The wedding cost more than we budgeted, and Ray's situation with the business hasn't been—" "You didn't ask me. You would have said no." I looked at her. I looked at Ray, who was still looking at his plate. I looked back at my mother, who had the expression she always got when she was waiting for me to understand something she felt she shouldn't have to explain. "You're right," I said. "I would have said no." I stood up, took a cup of coffee from the buffet, and went back to my room. I did not cry. I want to say that clearly because I think people expect a certain kind of reaction in a moment like that, and I didn't have it. What I felt was something closer to the specific calm that comes right after a car accident, when your body is flooded with adrenaline and everything around you becomes very sharp and very quiet. I had known my mother my whole life. I had known, in the way you know things you don't let yourself think about directly, that she had certain ideas about money and family and what those words meant together. I had known that to her. What was mine had always been somewhat negotiably ours. I just hadn't known she would act on it without asking. I sat on the edge of the hotel bed and thought about the $87,400, 3 years of night shifts as a registered nurse. 3 years of picking up extra weekends, working holidays, taking the overnight float position nobody else wanted because it paid a differential. 3 years of eating lunch I packed from home and not replacing my car when the check engine light came on and telling myself the discomfort was temporary because the goal was real. I had a deposit on a condo. I was supposed to sign the paperwork in 11 days. I thought about all of that, and then I thought about what my mother had just told me with total calm over a plate of hotel fruit. "You would have said no." I opened my laptop and started making a list. I am a planner by nature. In nursing, you develop a particular relationship with worst-case scenarios. You spend your shifts thinking 2 and 3 steps ahead because the cost of not thinking ahead is someone getting hurt. I had learned to stay calm in emergencies by turning them into problems, and problems into steps, and steps into actions. This was an emergency, so I made a list. First, I called the bank. A wire transfer authorized by a joint account holder was, they explained carefully, within the terms of the account. It was not, technically, fraud on the bank's part. I asked about recovery options. They gave me a case number and a form and not much hope. Then I called a lawyer. Not a family friend, not someone my mother knew. I found a name through my hospital's employee assistance program. A woman who specialized in financial disputes and estate matters. I left a voicemail and she called me back within the hour. I told her what had happened. She asked me several questions in a very level voice. She said, "Come in Monday, bring everything." Then I called my best friend Danny, who had been my roommate through nursing school and who I trusted more than almost anyone alive. I told her what had happened. She said, "Where are you right now?" I said, "Still at the hotel." She said, "Go home. Don't talk to your mother again today. I'll come over tonight." I checked out of the hotel 2 hours before I was supposed to. I did not say goodbye to my mother. I texted Cassie that I had to leave early, that I loved her, that the wedding had been perfect. Cassie texted back a row of heart emojis and said she'd call me when she landed from the honeymoon. I told her to enjoy every second of it. On the drive home, I thought about what I knew. I knew the joint account designation was my mistake, and I wasn't going to pretend otherwise. It had been naive. I had trusted someone I had evidence not to fully trust, and that was something I would have to sit with. But knowing that something was partly your fault doesn't mean it isn't also wrong. A door being unlocked doesn't make it legal to walk into someone's house and take their furniture. I knew my mother believed she had not done anything wrong. That was the part that kept landing. She hadn't looked guilty. She had looked like she was waiting for me to see reason. I knew that Ray's business had been struggling. I had heard things, peripheral things, the way you hear things in a family, a comment here, an overheard phone call there, a sudden awkwardness when money came up at Christmas. I had chosen not to ask directly because I had learned that asking directly in my family usually meant being invited to solve a problem I hadn't created. I knew that the wedding had been expensive. My mother had chosen an expensive venue, an expensive caterer, an expensive florist. She had upgraded things throughout the planning process in ways I had watched with a low hum of anxiety I hadn't let myself name. I had paid for my bridesmaid duties without complaint. I had bought a gift from the registry. I had not been asked to contribute more, and I had told myself that meant the budget was handled. I knew that in 11 days, if I couldn't recover the money or replace it, I would lose my deposit on the condo, and with it, the rate I had locked in, which my realtor had told me was unlikely to come back. I laid all of this out very carefully in my head on the drive home, the way you lay out instruments before a procedure. Then I thought about what could be done. The lawyer meeting on Monday was the first step. In the meantime, I needed documentation. I pulled every record I could access, bank statements going back 3 years, showing the deposits, the slow accumulation, the dates, and amounts. I pulled the account agreement showing when and how the joint designation had been added. I pulled my pay stubs. I put everything in a folder and labeled it clearly. Then I did something I want to explain carefully, because I've had people ask me about it since, and I want them to understand my thinking. I called my mother back. I called her, and I was warm. I said I had overreacted that morning, that I was tired and stressed from the wedding and hadn't processed what she said properly. She relaxed immediately, I could hear it. She said she knew I'd understand once I thought about it, that family means sharing, that she and Ray were going to pay me back as soon as the business stabilized. I said I understood. I asked a few gentle questions. How much had the wedding gone over? What was Ray's timeline looking like? Had they thought about what the repayment plan might look like? She answered all of them freely, in the relieved way people answer questions when they think the conflict is over. I listened, and I remembered. I did not tell her I had already spoken to a lawyer. Over the following week, I met with the attorney, whose name was Patricia, and who had a very still, focused quality that I found immediately reassuring. She reviewed everything and told me that while the wire transfers themselves were technically authorized, there were several angles worth pursuing. The nature of the joint designation as a beneficiary arrangement, rather than a full access grant, was worth examining, and depending on how the funds had been used, there might be grounds for a civil claim. She was careful not to overpromise. I appreciated that. I also made a quiet call to my uncle, my mother's older brother, who was the only person in the family my mother genuinely deferred to. I told him what had happened without drama, just the facts and the numbers. He was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "Maya, I'm sorry. I had no idea." I believed him. He asked what he could do. I said, "Nothing yet. I just wanted you to know." I told Danny everything. Danny had known my mother since we were 22, had seen things over the years, had once said to me very quietly that she thought my mother's relationship with my finances had always been a little too comfortable. I had defended my mother then. I thought about that now. I also, during that week, made a decision about the condo. I called my realtor and explained there had been a family emergency affecting my liquidity. She was professional and kind. The deposit was partially recoverable, not all of it, but enough to soften the immediate impact. I lost some money. I extended my timeline. I told myself that a condo I couldn't close on in 11 days was not the end of the story. It was just not this chapter. It hurt more than I expected it to. I had walked through that condo 4 times. I knew which window caught the morning light. On the 10th day after the wedding, Patricia called me with an update. The funds had been used partly on outstanding wedding vendor balances, and partly this was the part that made my breath catch on a debt Ray had with a private creditor that had apparently been accruing for over a year. My mother had known about this debt. She had known when she took the money what she was using it for. She had looked at my savings and seen a solution to a problem she had been carrying quietly for months. Patricia said we had a viable civil case. She said we should also discuss whether to pursue it, because winning in court and recovering money were 2 different things, and we needed to talk about Ray's actual financial position and what a judgment would mean practically. I asked her to give me a week to think. I spent that week not calling my mother. I spent it working my shifts, which were long, and coming home to my apartment, which was small, and sitting with the specific quality of grief that comes not from losing something suddenly, but from understanding something you had refused to understand. My mother loved me. I did not doubt that exactly, but her love had always had an asterisk. It had always contained the assumption that I would absorb certain costs because I was capable of absorbing them, and being capable was, in her understanding, the same as being willing. She had never learned that those were different things because I had never made her learn it. I had been making it easy for a very long time. At the end of that week, I called Patricia and told her to move forward. I also, and this is the part people ask about most, prepared for a conversation with my mother that I knew would happen eventually and that I intended to control entirely. She called me, finally, on a Sunday morning 3 weeks after the wedding. She had been giving me space, which I now understood as rope. She called and asked if we could have lunch, just the 2 of us. She had been thinking about things and wanted to talk. I said yes. I chose a public restaurant, a diner near my apartment, where the tables were close together and the noise level was low and consistent, not somewhere she could raise her voice without being heard. I arrived first. When she sat down, she looked like herself, composed, warm, dressed nicely, the way she always dressed for anything she considered an important meeting. She asked about my week. I said it had been long. She said she had been thinking about our conversation at the hotel, and she wanted to explain more about Ray's situation, help me understand the full picture. I let her talk. She talked for several minutes. She explained about the debt, the pressure, the wedding costs that had spiraled, the way she had felt trapped and seen my account as the only option that wouldn't require them to tell anyone else they were struggling. She said she had been meaning to call me for weeks. She said she loved me and she hoped I could find a way to see this as something a mother does when she has nowhere else to turn. I waited until she was finished. Then I opened my bag and put a folder on the table between us. I said, "I've retained an attorney. I wanted you to hear this from me directly." She looked at the folder and then at me, and the warmth in her face shifted into something more careful. I said, "I'm not doing this out of anger. I want you to know I've thought about it for 3 weeks and this is where I've landed." She said my name. I said, "Let me finish." She did. I told her what Patricia had found. I told her about the creditor payment, which my mother had not known I knew about. I watched her realize that the phone conversation she'd thought was a reconciliation had also been documentation. She didn't say anything for a moment. Then she said, "Maya, this is our family." I said, "I know." She said, "You would do this to your own mother." I said, "You took $87,000 from me without asking. You used it partly to hide a secret from me. I would have helped you if you'd asked. I might have said no, but I would have had a conversation with you. You decided that was too risky, and you made a choice. I'm making one too." She left without finishing her coffee. The legal process was not fast and it was not neat. I want to be honest about that because in stories, people sometimes make justice sound like a door swinging open all at once, and the reality was more like a series of small movements over a long time. There were filings and responses, and a mediation session where Ray barely spoke, and my mother looked at me across the table with an expression I recognized as the one she used when she believed she was being deeply wronged. There were months where I second-guessed myself, and months where I felt only a clean, functional resolve. My uncle ended up playing a significant role. When he understood the full picture, the hidden creditor debt, the way the money had actually been used, he had a conversation with my mother that I was not present for and do not know the details of. What I know is that after it, my mother's attorney indicated a willingness to negotiate. The settlement we reached was not the full amount, but it was substantial. It was enough. Ray and my mother sold the house. I don't know if that was entirely because of the settlement, or if there were other pressures already building financial situations like the one they were in, tend to have multiple points of stress. What I know is that they moved into a rental apartment and that Ray's business closed. My mother and I did not speak for 8 months. When we began speaking again, it was slowly, carefully, at a distance that I set and maintained. She called on my birthday, I answered. We talked for 20 minutes about nothing in particular. At the end of the call, she said she hoped I was doing well. I said I was. Both of those things were true. Cassie found out eventually. She and Marcus had come home from the honeymoon to a family situation that was different from the one they'd left, and piecing it together took her a few months. She called me on a Tuesday evening and asked me to tell her the whole thing. I did. She was quiet for a long time. Then she said, "I don't know how you stayed as calm as you did at the wedding." I said I hadn't really been calm, I just hadn't known yet. She said, "You know that's not what I mean." I did know. Cassie and I are close in a way we weren't before. Something about shared knowledge of a hard thing does that sometimes it removes a layer of pretend that you didn't realize had been between you. I found another condo, 8 months later. Different building, slightly different neighborhood, better light. I made a list of everything I needed to do differently with the account setup, and I did all of it. The closing was on a Thursday morning, and Danny came with me, and we got coffee after, and she said, "How does it feel?" I thought about it for a second. I said, "Solid." She laughed. It was the right word. I think about what I would tell someone who was in the position I was in on that hotel morning, looking at $14 and knowing who had put them there. I would tell them that the first instinct to make the conflict go away, to find the interpretation that lets everyone be okay, is not weakness, it's just the wrong tool for the situation. I would tell them that being someone's child does not mean absorbing every cost of being loved by them. I would tell them that protecting yourself is not the same as not loving someone. Those things can both be true at the same time, and it takes a while to believe that, but it is true. There is a version of this story where I accepted what my mother said at breakfast and told myself it was complicated, and went home and rebuilt more slowly and didn't make waves. I know that version. I almost lived it. I'm glad I didn't. Your history with someone doesn't give them a claim on your future. And the fact that someone would have difficulty respecting a boundary doesn't mean you don't get to have it. Protect your peace. You earned it. No one has the right to take it from you, not even the people who love you, especially not them. If this story hit close to home, I want you to know you're not alone, and I'd really like to hear from you in the comments. Tell me what part stayed with you. And if you know someone who needs to hear this today, please share it with them. I'll see you in the next one.